Housing prices are facing record increases every day.
He asked for a 150% increase for me. Honestly, I said I couldn't meet it and filed an eviction lawsuit directly.
The housing problem for students is increasing every day.
The property owner sees themselves in a much stronger and more powerful position. But later on, it becomes apparent that the tenant is in a much more advantageous position legally.
Then he started to pressure and threaten me to leave the house. I'll come there, I'll tear the place down.
We are currently in Bebek, where the real estate price per square meter is the highest.
There isn't even a rental house available for the middle-income group.
As a result of seeing housing as an investment tool, certain segments of society actually start acquiring multiple properties.
Frankly, it's not right for platforms like ours, which operate in online advertising, to intervene in prices. It's not even possible anyway.
You have to provide that assurance. Imagine entrusting your 16, 17, 18-year-old child to a city.
We are university students, left without scholarships, dormitories, or homes.
Is it not a problem that there are no dormitories? Or that renting a house at these prices is not an issue? Or is it not a problem that 20 young people are sleeping on the benches here? In Eskişehir, a group of university students gathered in a park, claiming that rents are very high and there is no space in the dormitories.
Some park garden, those lying on the benches, here say this clearly and openly, some of them have nothing to do with being students. This is exactly another version of the Gezi Park incident.
Oh God, oh God!
An email is sent to our president, Mr. Mansur Yavaş, and I believe it was from 2 female students. An email saying, we will now stay in the mosque, or we are outside. We are, of course, hosting them in some way, as we have promised not to leave them on the street.
Hopefully, until the backup is finished, you are entrusted to us. Everything belongs to us. We will place you in safe dormitories.
But the number of these emails starts to increase over time. We are responding to them in some way as well. We promised not to leave them on the street. But after a while, the emails or the calls to our call center become incessant.
Now, the crisis that students are experiencing is, of course, somewhat triggered by the pandemic. It's evident. During the pandemic, a large portion of the housing built as student accommodations or private student dormitories, especially because they were closed, because they had to close, there is a shortage here.
We have witnessed many times here that families said, I was going to take my daughter out of school. We were leaving tonight. Oh, I've been sleeping in the car for 2 days. The biggest crisis had erupted over our children, who are the future of our country. The mayor, the mother, father, everything of the city entrusts the family to us. No, no, no. The issue of speaking is not a new problem. The issue of speaking has always been a problem for low-income and poor households. Why then it is coming to the forefront so much during this period?
Because now the problem has also started to affect middle and relatively high-income groups. It has started to affect students. But of course, the municipality is unprepared on the one hand. Unprepared in this way. Firstly, in terms of authority, we don't have a very big problem in this regard. Secondly, we are not expecting such a surge in demand. We were responding to emails. Suddenly, the front of the municipality started to fill with hundreds of people. Families began to flock in. There are currently very high prices in rents in the housing sector. Compared to 2020, there is a 4- to 5-fold increase by 2022, but income has not increased at that level. Let's say, or even if it increased, the cost of living, that is purchasing power, has decreased. This puts students in a difficult situation. They try to manage somehow with the loans they receive from the state.
You have to give that confidence. Imagine entrusting your child who is 16, 17, 18 years old to a city. This place they're going to is not a relative, not a friend, nor have they rented their own place. So you are placing them somewhere through a state institution, and we organized a large operation, initially involving hotels, and later moving them to residences as they were completed.
In other words, the law based on the principle of equality and the principle of general applicability to everyone also considers students here as general tenants. But in fact, students are socially much more disadvantaged among tenants.
The office I work at is very close to Boğaziçi University, and in the last few months we have received many requests from students. However, due to the high rents and the low number of available residences, students are in a very difficult situation, and it has become extremely challenging.
But when left to their own devices, students create their own solutions in market conditions. What do? They rent rooms, they start living together. In a house where 3 people used to live, now 6 people start living as tenants.
As we mentioned, since students generally share houses with more than one person, a house that would be rented to a family for 5,000 liras is rented to students for 6,000, 6,500 or 7,000 liras. Because ultimately, 4 or 5 people come together to pay this rent.
I can tell you that at the beginning of the pandemic, houses with an average rent of 15 to 20,000 TL now have an average ranging between 45 and 60,000. Therefore, many landlords naturally want to evict their old tenants and find new ones. Rightfully so, because when you look at it, the amounts paid by old tenants are currently far below the inflation level.
Actually, I wasn't planning to move into this house. I've been dealing with these processes for 2 or 3 months. How did I end up moving into this house? Well, my landlord scammed me. Well, his wife was already a cancer patient and was living on the floor below me. The house was a duplex. I was living in the attic. I was in a 1-bedroom house, and my landlord left the house right in May. The reason for leaving was that his wife had been undergoing cancer treatment for 4 or 5 years. After that process, he went to another city. He said, "We will continue the treatment in another city." I already knew that his wife had cancer. Okay, there was no problem up to this point. Well, but then around June, he told me that they needed to return. So he said, "You need to move out of the house." He said, "Our doctor requested something like this from us." Of course, at first, yes, I didn't believe the situation when he said it. But then he sent the doctor's report and such. After he sent the doctor's report, I said, "Okay, you can return, but look for another house, because I am currently living here." Meanwhile, he rented out the lower floor, which he had previously lived in, to someone else for a very high amount. Then, because he wanted me to leave the house, he started to pressure and threaten me. He said he would come there and destroy the place. After all, I live alone. He said something like this: "If I lose my wife," he said, "I can't find a new wife, but you can find a new house. So please leave my house, Ms. Rana," he said. And I was very moved, because I thought, what if he's telling the truth? What if he really needs to come because of his wife's illness? My previous landlord didn't move in. He is still looking for a tenant. When I saw this ad, I first called the landlord. "So, how are you? Are you well? Is everything okay?" Then I said, "Aren't you ashamed to lie to me? Aren't you ashamed to deceive me?" I said. And moreover, I said, "You are using your cancer-stricken spouse for this."
So he evicted you from your home. He said, my son is coming from Germany, which is a well-known excuse, and evicted you. But then his son didn't come from Germany, and he rented it to someone else for double the price. At this point, he actually incurs a liability to compensate you for approximately 1 year's rent. This also applies under the same conditions if your property is purchased by another person.
The proposal to limit the rent increase rate to 25% was accepted in the General Assembly. So what are the details? Listen right away.
It was published in the official gazette, and the maximum increase rate for residential rents was limited to 25%. So according to this
rate will be valid for 1 year and will cover lease agreements renewed until July 1st, 2023.
So actually, neither the 25% nor the official rates. Landlords continue to demand increases far above these rates.
At least if this hadn't come out, people would have had even more exorbitant expectations. Expectations for rent increases like 100%, 150%, or even 200%. Currently, even if landlords and tenants can't agree on 25%, they find a middle ground. So it could be 50%, 60%, or even the inflation rate.
But I think temporary measures like this 25% application are not sufficient. Why is it not sufficient? Because ultimately, the issue doesn't stem from a lack of law or insufficient legal regulations. The problem here is fundamentally an economic issue. Property owners here often use these rents as an investment tool.
In fact, the commodification of housing on a global scale is the fundamental issue. In other words, the economic value of housing has surpassed its use value. Therefore, in such an investment environment where housing is seen as an investment tool, it is not very easy for some segments of society to realize their right to housing. It's not easy to fulfill.
Actually, we need to look at it a bit. In other words, we need to rewind the film a bit. We need to look before 2017 as well, so we can express the present more clearly.
Actually, every country has its own unique housing system. We call it path dependency for housing systems. In other words, these systems reflect the choices made and policies developed in the past, and they are all different from each other.
Are we ready? Oh God! In the name of God!
So how did this stock come about? Why are the houses remaining unsold? Does this situation indicate a bottleneck in the construction sector, which has been the locomotive of the economy for years?
This project truly and undoubtedly has absolutely everything, without a doubt indeed, you could say.
In 2007, we enacted the Housing Finance Law number 5582. In other words, consumers began to realize their tendencies to purchase property by using housing loans under more specific standards. This process, which started in 2007, accelerated significantly, especially as we approached 2013, when the interest rates on loans fell below 1%.
In a period when money is less valuable, real estate continues to rise. But while the cash you have on hand loses its value day by day, when you invest in real estate, its price continues to rise.
In 2013, the improvement in financing conditions, income growth, and the drop in loan interest rates below 1% led to a significant shift towards the housing sector in Turkey. This is a dynamic. In the end, there is demand, so the producer enters into a desire and expectation to produce more, because there is a return involved here.
When we look at it this way, real estate prices in Turkey, especially if we talk about Istanbul in general, have been progressing at a level indexed to the dollar for many years. Both the increase in inflation and the rise in the dollar exchange rate have, of course, been reflected in house prices.
As you know, the determination of housing and land real estate prices in our country is entirely based on the rules of a free market economy. Here, of course, the balance of supply and demand, population mobility, or credit conditions are actually the most important factors in the formation of prices, because we actually know that a significant portion of the price increases are speculative. Here, as you know, we see a large number of listings on real estate websites. We see that the listings change from day to day. Now, a regulation has been introduced regarding this, but before that, you would see a house listed for 2 million, and 2 days later, it would be listed for 4 million. Therefore, we see that there is a very serious speculative increase.
Platforms like ours are subject to a law numbered 5651, and we are bound by that law. According to that law, our duty is to provide space. We are space providers. We can actually liken this to a marketplace. The primary duty of a marketplace is to bring buyers and sellers together, but not to interfere with the prices there. So our role here is actually exactly the same. Here, prices are entirely determined by the supply and demand balance.
After these kinds of real estate portals started, people began to think like this. Everyone's home is valuable to them. If the house of the next door neighbor was priced at X, the owner would act as if their own house should be priced at X times 10, setting a higher price. And thus it was marketed by some property owners. Because in fact, when you look at it, the prices formed on these kinds of real estate portals are a bit above the real prices.
Imagine there were no platforms like ours. Imagine there were no online platforms. So what would you need to do when you want to buy a house? If you are thinking of buying or renting a house in a neighborhood or district, you would need to go out and see all the possible houses for sale or rent one by one and compare them all with each other. And this is not in line with the natural flow of life. It's not possible for you to do this. So you can only compare a limited number of houses for sale or rent in a specific area. But thanks to us and platforms like ours, you can access listings and alternatives, not just in that district, not just in that neighborhood, but in that city, and even throughout all of Turkey. Therefore, platforms like ours allow you to see all the alternatives. It's not possible for us to have an impact on the increase in prices. As I mentioned earlier, we do not intervene in prices in any way.
Especially after 2018, each increase in exchange rates caused the production of goods to become more costly. If I remember correctly, TÜRKİYE recently published the Building Construction Cost Index data for August. There is an increase of 4.6% on a monthly içimbez basis. Every product produced becomes more costly compared to the previous day.
Therefore, the main source of the problem is not our inability to produce housing, but it is important where and for whom these houses are being produced. Therefore, from an urban planning perspective, it actually stems from not analyzing the housing need correctly. In other words, which segments of society need housing and where.
We see that the profile in the middle and lower middle class is now struggling to meet the current prices. But the situation in the luxury segment is somewhat different, since it is a region with very limited supply. If we speak specifically about the area I work in, there are difficulties in finding housing.
In some provinces or districts of Turkey, construction permits are not granted for buildings under 75 square meters gross construction. There is a construction ban. When people build a gross area of 75 square meters, they don't make it a 1+1, but rather 2+1, yes, and larger constructions.
While the number of single and two-person households has increased significantly in recent decades, there is a decrease in the number of nuclear and extended families. But our stock is not in a position to respond to this. A large part of our stock still consists of 3+1, 4+1 residences and the houses averaging 100 to 120 square meters.
This leads individuals who want to live alone, or students that is, those who would suffice with a 1+1 apartment or a 45 to 50 square meter apartment to rent larger square meter homes.
At the point we have reached today, we do not seem to be in a position to solve this problem with the policy tools we have. First of all, there is a policy approach that sees the country as uniform in the field of housing policy.
Since the beginning of this year, we have been publishing a Sahib Index Housing Market Outlook report every month. Looking at their latest report, I can say that in Istanbul, the increase in prices of houses for sale has stopped and even decreased slightly.
The government has implemented a social housing project on this matter. I am sure that this will have an impact on the market in general.
My dear nation, we plan to complete the first phase of our massive social housing project, which includes 250,000 social housing units, 250,000 housing plots, and 10,000 workplaces within 2 years, and make them available to the rightful owners.
I think the fact that a certain income threshold is being expressed, and when we look at the proportionality between the expressed income threshold and the installments, the preservation of that 30% barrier shows us that this project is actually being offered in terms of financial accessibility.
It will have an effect on people with a middle income level, but not too much. That's why, because it cannot enter the market at once, and it is something that will be delivered in 2 years.
Increasing the supply of housing is one of the most important issues. For solving this matter, and recently there have been some actions taken by the government regarding this issue, I can say that it is at least an important action on the path to a solution.
If you look at the levels the rental sector has reached today, you can see that it has significantly contracted compared to the 1990s. The sustainability of the rental sector is not currently anticipated with any policy measures. The rental sector continues on its own as a byproduct of the home ownership sector. Therefore, we do not have a prediction about how much our rental stock will decrease or increase in the long term. First of all, we need to take measures on this issue.
Leasing is one of the important functions of development. But as I said, since the production process is entirely sales-oriented, I think the rental aspect does not enter the focus area of the producer. However, this is not the case abroad. Abroad, development is considered a primary element, and leasing is one of its very important components. There is also a need for a change in vision. In other words, instead of the developer's mindset of let me produce and sell what I produce, it needs to shift to let me produce, consider this as a long-term business, maybe furnish it or maybe not, but rent it out and thus create a cash flow for myself from this.
Some rental assistance programs can be designed for employees in these key sectors. For example, we want to improve educational opportunities in Istanbul. We want teachers to work in Istanbul as well. However, it is quite difficult for a teacher to make a living, find a house and pay rent in Istanbul. In such a situation, rental assistance packages can be designed for key sector employees in special areas, especially in regions where employment is concentrated or where there is a chronic housing shortage.
For example, it's necessary to differentiate between a person who owns 20 houses and someone who owns just one. Ultimately, we mentioned among the examples we gave that a retired couple bought a house with their retirement bonus and sends the rental income from it as pocket money to their grandchild, right? This is one typology. But there are also people who own 50 houses. Now, the person who owns 50 houses has established a company. They have transferred all these houses to this company. This company has a lawyer and accountant, and its sole job is now to collect these rents, to make rental agreements and keep the accounts. If different percentage applications can be applied to the rental incomes of people with one house, 5 houses, and those with 10 or more houses, I think they will naturally impose some restrictions on their rental demands due to the reduction in their incomes.
One of the most ideal solutions I see here is the mechanism applied in the United Kingdom, that is allowing the producer to create projects for different segments or income structures in each project they produce, and having the public not support this. Producing a certain portion of the housing for the lower income group, offering a certain portion within the same project as accessible housing, for example, sold at below 20% of the market value one-to-one, and pricing the remainder according to your own profitability scale, to present to the market.
Therefore, until we solve this problem, together, until these issues are resolved, we will continue to experience such things. So the issue is not about someone, a single person. The issue is actually about the people. Because I don't believe that people's situations can change unless they change their own circumstances. I don't believe that the situation of the people can change. Therefore, everyone needs to sit down and question themselves. They need to think about what we did to end up in this situation. The consequences are also affecting us.